Hi, welcome to this week's edition of Blue Soccer. Again, John, Dave, and myself. Going to look back over Leinster's victory against Connacht at the weekend, all the other URC action. Look forward to our big game against Munster, and of course, the autumn international squad that was announced today as well. So that's 10-0 down in Galway in a very wet and windy night. And they might as well need to build a roof over that stadium. They have a nice pitch, but still can't filter out the inclement conditions. But a win is a win, and it was tough, but we got our 4 points.
Yeah, Connacht had their dander up. They were confident after the game against Munster, and they made it hard. Conditions didn't help as well. I mean, sometimes games in Connacht can be like that. Sometimes you go down and you hammer them. Sometimes you go down and it's just a matter of getting through it, and that's what we did. We got through it. The moment we had the one moment of quality from it in the game, Josh van der Fleer for Cormac Foley was from us. That was the difference between the two teams, literally, as it turned out.
The wind and the rain held up just for that, and then kind of came down in a quarter of an hour and stayed down for the rest of the evening. And obviously there was no scores until the last 5 minutes when Frawley got that penalty. But in some respects, I think we were quite lucky that Connacht didn't take any of their points. They seemed to want to get their try instead of spurning a few shots at goal.
Yeah, when the game started and we ran in a try early on, it looked like it was from a maul actually, wasn't it? But it looked like we were going to start running rampant, and then, as you say, Jason, the weather had other ideas, and it's kind of no surprise that the handling and everything else turned to shit with the quality of the rain affected the quality of the handling, but. It's good to get out of there with a win. Unfortunate for Connacht, like you say, if they'd taken even one of their penalties, they would have had at least a losing bonus point to show. But they took none of them, and it kind of played into our hands a little bit. Like the game didn't look to be in doubt really, but just because of the scoreline, when you're only winning 7-0, you always feel a bit uneasy. But I think we had a good grip of the game. In fairness, they weren't making any inroads through us. They made a mess of our line out though yet again. That's a big work on there. I think Leo will have to get the tracksuit on and get out and start cracking heads. But other than that, yeah, it was.
Our line out is very mediocre and has been for all of this calendar year. I don't know, but but what you said, John, is accurate. I mean, they had a certain amount of ball, but we were always able to keep them at arm's length. Yeah. They never really stressed us that much. I mean, they had that one chance where Blade flashed a pass out to Hansen, but it went straight into touch. Yeah. So, and that was the chance.
Mm-hmm. I thought though, with scoring within whatever it was, 5 minutes or whatever from the kickoff, that the floodgates were going to open, and exactly. they kind of held us out on a couple of occasions that you just felt only we could have got some points then, and the opening quarter of an hour got another try. It could have been a cricket score, but we played to Connacht. I mean, they showed a lot of guts, determination to kind of keep it scoreless for 70 minutes of the game. But I suppose there was some good news and some bad news during the game. Good news, Furlong got his first half of the season. He came through it, although their scrum did put him under a little bit of pressure on a couple of occasions. And the bad news, James Ryan looked like he could have sustained a very nasty injury on his knee, but thankfully it doesn't seem to be as bad as initially I suspected when I was watching it.
Yeah, well, he's named in the Autumn International squad. That's a positive. That's if you thought he was going to be out for a good while, he's obviously not.
Well, I thought he was going to be out for a Dan Levy kind of job with
those ones where some guy falls and you get trapped under something. They always look. I always worry about those ones.
Yeah, I mean it only needs another couple of kilos of pressure on one side or just someone's knee to be blocking against him for it to be a very, very nasty injury. So I suppose he was fortunate it wasn't as serious as it could have been.
Yeah.
So like anyway, we got out of Dodge with our 4 points. So, you know, still unbeaten. That's 5 wins from 5 games. Tipping along very nicely. Still top of the table.
The only other unbeaten team got held to a draw by the Ospreys, so that's great news for us. They're still unbeaten, but and they have a game in hand over everyone else, bar the Sharks. But they got held up by the Ospreys, which who would have predicted that? It's champs held to a draw by the Ospreys. I know it was in Australia, but even so, I think that was pretty impressive by the lads.
Yeah, like Ospreys seem to be able to have these flashes of greatness, and then they go back into their being mediocre again, don't they?
They definitely blow hot and cold. I mean, they have a lot of good players in, or not a lot, but they have a core of good players there. I mean, they have Alan Wynne Jones, they have Tipperick, they have George North, they have what's his name as well. Is Lydiate there now?
Yeah.
So they have good play. They have a core of good players. It's just a matter of, you know, what's around them, keeping them to that standard.
Yeah.
Sure.
One other game I just which I saw was the Ulster game against the Lions. I mean, that was a ding-donger of a match. It ended up 39-37 in favour of Ulster, and you know, like they looked like they were going to get stuffed in the first half. They had a magnificent opening 20, scored some cracking tries, and got back in the lead and held on, although they nearly coughed it up. Probably were never really going to be caught. I think they were 9 points clear with a couple of minutes to go. Conceded that try, and so it was really only a bit of window dressing for the Lions. But Michael Lowry had a good game. He's named also in that Irish Autumn International squad. So I know Hugo Keenan is also named in it, but he hasn't actually played so far this season. So you never know.
Yeah, I mean,
Lowry could get a start.
You'd have to say that. Okay, we would assume if Keenan isn't there, the form guy is between Lowry and O'Brien, and Lowry is the guy who's. I mean, he's actually very similar to the players that South Africa like to play in that position.
Mm-hmm.
For all the fact that they're a huge team and a big team, they do like to have steppers. They have either one on the wing or one at fullback, and he's a very good player. I mean, that kick for he got a little bit of luck at the end, but that kick for the 50-22 that bounced off the corner flag, that was a beautiful kick. Great vision to see it.
Yeah,
and he kicked it with the outside of his foot as well. So he's a very skillful.
Yeah, every one of those Ulster players looked absolutely banjacks at the end.
Oh yeah,
between
but I mean that was it.
30 degrees heat and
30 degrees heat and playing up on the high veld. But they held on. I think it just shows in fairness, it says a lot about the conditioning that they held on. Because that's a game that Ulster would have lost 2 years ago, 18 months ago. And I mean, they've kind of got the reward with as you say, with what's his face, Lowry in the Ireland squad. Stockdale's back from injury, and he's back at a good time with James Lowe out, because we're a bit skinny on back three players. And McCluskey got into the Irish squad for reasons beyond my ken. But I'd have Luke Marshall in there. I don't know why McCluskey's in there and not Luke Marshall. Luke Marshall is 10 times the player.
They've only picked 3 centres, which I thought was a bit.
I presume they have Frawley there as well.
Yeah, Frawley.
Yeah, he's named a 10 though. You know, like they.
He is, but I'd assume. I mean, you can put a hat on a clown and call him a burger, but he's still a clown. Like, so, well, that's a bad example. But Frawley can still play centre. I mean, most of his rugby is at centre. I mean, almost all of his rugby's been at centre in his career.
Yeah, I think it's encouraging to see him named at 10 by the IRFU. It's him, Carberry, and Johnny Sexton. You could even have the old excuse of, Joey Carberry covers 15, and so does Frawley. Joey Carberry nominally covers 12, but Frawley definitely covers 12, so he's his primary position.
I mean, you could have a match where all 3 10s play and only one of them's at out half.
Exactly. That That was what I was leading up to. You could even name the two lads at 22 and 23. Bit of a risk there because you've no wing cover, but you've everything else covered.
Carberry has played in the wing before, but a long time ago.
And you can also move Gary Ringrose, probably in beside Henshaw. So
superstar winger.
Yeah, I'm just saying. I'm not saying that in the plans. I'm just saying it's technically possible. That's all. The one thing I thought was who are your starting wingers for Ireland in the autumn international? Is Stockdale get in ahead of Mike Hansen, or Balakoon get? Is it Hansen on one wing and Stockdale on the other? Does Balakoon get a look in? Without James Lowe and Conway and Earls and all these.
Stockdale and Hansen.
Yeah.
I'm wondering though, lads, like, are they going to?
Both left wingers.
But are they going to look at the squad and say, we have to now focus? Really, if we beat Australia or lose to South Africa, the greater scheme of things makes no real difference. So at this point, surely Farrell has to be saying, I've got to be picking my squad for the World Cup, or picking teams with the World Cup in mind, and saying, I'm going to give Stockdale and Hansen a game in this game, and the following week I'm going to play, Jimmy O'Brien and Balakoon on the wings.
Whatever you do against, say, Fiji, against South Africa, you pick your strongest team.
Absolutely.
You pick a team that you feel could go out in a World Cup quarterfinal.
But my point is he going to pick the same identical starting team 2 weeks in a row, or for the two big games?
I wouldn't have thought so. No, I think he'll have what will be his strongest team, or at least in his mind is his strongest team for the game against South Africa, strongest available team for the game against South Africa. Then Australia, you'll have a bit of a blend, and then Fiji, a bit more of a risk.
I think there's no chance that he's going to do any experimenting with the South Africa. A chance of beating South Africa, the world champions, a year out from a World Cup. That's not worth pissing about with,
No, that's fair enough. That's fair enough. Sure, pick your strong team against South Africa. But what are you going to do in 2 weeks' time against Australia?
Well, that's what we're saying.
Are you going to? I know.
That's what we're saying. We're agreeing with that. I mean, against Australia, I'd give guys like I'd be inclined to give guys like Jimmy O'Brien and Michael Lowry a run. I'd be inclined to even give Stuart McCloskey a run at certain times. There's no harm in that, and there's no harm in trying in giving Frawley or Carberry a start at out half. As long as you keep the other guys on the bench, of course, because it is still Australia, so you might need to do you might need to bring guys back. But I would certainly be more inclined to experiment against Australia, and certainly against Fiji. I wouldn't experiment at all against South Africa.
Yeah, I wouldn't experiment against Australia either. Maybe I'm getting conservative in my old age, but I'd be going for the win against them as well.
Well, if you are, John, you'll have to take that T-shirt off.
They're not to be sniffed at. No.
Sharpen up, young man. Look at that. Get a haircut.
If you're getting conservative, John, you'll have to lose the Zappa T-shirt.
I should have worn a different T-shirt, all right, for that mindset. However, no,
Coldplay or something.
I definitely, I definitely would be looking for the win against Australia. Australia are not to be sniffed at. Like they were going well in the Rugby Championship. Losing to them in Lansdowne Road is not an option if you're going to the World Cup to take any scalps. That's a dent in your confidence. Same with South Africa. South Africa come full bore and we go full bore. Okay, all bets are off. If we lose, we lose. If we win, but if we win, we got to go out to win. And the same against Australia. Fiji, you can give your granny a cap against Fiji. It doesn't really matter. But
I understand what you're saying.
You lost against Fiji.
The game against Australia, I'd be inclined to use.
Surely, John, surely a loss against Fiji is far more a dent in confidence than a loss against Australia.
Of course, but you're going to be playing, your granny, my granny, and Dave's granny against them. And loss isn't a big dent to your confidence. Okay, if you were playing 3/4 of your full strength team and a few lads in with them, then it'd be a big dent to your confidence. Well, I don't think you do that either.
I think you use the game against South Africa. You use as if it were a quarterfinal of a World Cup. The game against Australia, you use as if it were a quarterfinal of a World Cup, like we had a couple of years ago, where we had a couple of guys out. So you need to gauge that strength and depth. So you bring those guys in. you mightn't start Keenan, or you mightn't start
Sexton,
or you mightn't start Gibson Park, or you mightn't start Sheehan. You might want to look at your depth, but you still pick a core, a strong team. I mean, we have a squad that certainly you've got at least 1.5 very strong teams in it, and that's what you need. That's what you need to go to a World Cup. And then you use the guys who are on the fringes, if you like, the guys who played against the Maori type squad or the Emerging Ireland type players against 3G.
One thing that I did notice in the Irish squad was Doak wasn't selected. They picked 3 scrum halves: Casey, Gibson Park, and Murray. Gibson Park has been injured, hasn't played a single minute of games so far this season. Casey has probably replaced Murray as the starting. Well, we'll see, obviously, if that's confirmed, but it looks like he's the starting first choice 9 down in Munster these days.
Leaving Doak out says one of 2 things. I mean, considering he didn't get named in the A squad, I think that's crazy. Like, there's three scrum halves to do.
To me, that says Gibson Park's not going to make it.
Well, it either says he definitely is going to make it, and that's why he's named there, or it's a Leinster injured in the warm-up situation where he's going to get pulled at the last minute and they'll decide on Doak or another.
No, I think well, with my tinfoil hat on, I think Gibson Park isn't going to make it, and Doak will be named in a couple of days or a week before the thing or whatever. I think it has that all over. I mean, because if you're naming the idea that whatever about him not making the senior, not making the A squad, that's
well, the A squad
like
the same weekend. South Africa.
It is, but like Callum Blade was named in that squad, so they've named 4 scrum halves. Do you know? And
okay.
So Doak is.
Sorry, I missed him.
By default, the 5th choice, or that's not including Luke McGrath or.
Yeah, I don't. I think there's a reason for it. Anyway, should we find out soon enough? Anyway,
we will indeed. Just a couple of other games from last weekend. Munster, obviously, they had a victory, a much heralded victory over the Bulls. They've rectified all their problems, Dave. They have steadied the ship. Yep. And are back to being the world's greatest team.
It's all full steam ahead for the good ship Munster after their huge victory over not so much the Bulls, more the Heifers.
Yes, and again, I was reading with interest that obviously Carberry had the best game ever and is the heir apparent for Sexton.
It's funny how I'll tell you one thing. Whatever about whatever the perception graph of players is wild. So it is, because you're only ever in the minds of fans, or the minds of a lot of fans, you're only ever as good as your last performance. I mean, Brian O'Driscoll could go out and play 20 world-class games in a row, but if 21 was poor on social media, he'd be slaughtered. It's an odd world. It's almost as odd as Leinster's "Where Are They Now" feature last weekend.
With Nyrone, and yes, that was unusual, wasn't
the
it?
answer to that is not far enough away. I thought that, no, but I did think that was an odd choice. Day. I mean, you guys remember what it was like being a Leinster fan, and we say 2006, 2007, 2008. We were getting slaughtered left, right, and centre in every form of media known to man, and some that hadn't been invented yet. And then, Niall Ronan, a guy who was a popular player and regarded as a good player, goes to Munster and adds to the slaughtering. I mean, it was seen very, very poorly by Leinster fans at the time. It was considered to be quite the
and he also had
quite the act of blackguardry.
Yeah, what's his name? He didn't go on about it, and he was in Munster from day one. But he was Kilkenny College. What was his name?
Dowling.
Dowling, yeah, Ian Dowling. So yeah, there was a few players.
No, I mean, there were just as many who went down to Munster and just said, "Well, I had a great time in Leinster. I learnt loads. I really, really enjoyed my time there. Now I'm here at Munster. I'm fully focused on that." That's the answer you give. You don't go, "Oh, my mates hate Leinster and support Munster," kind of thing. It was a hard time.
No, I was going to say there's a few lads in all the provinces now, as we know, and none of them are coming out and throwing a few incendiaries into the pot. Like, they're just getting on with it.
Yeah, I mean, there was. I mean, it was a very hard time to be. I mean, at the time, Leinster weren't the most successful team in the world. Probably did underperform. Probably were a bit. We were aware of that. We didn't need it to be pointed out by guys who'd left us in the lurch, kind of thing. So I thought it was an odd choice for where are they now feature on the Leinster site. But I'm sure Reggie Corrigan will have a wry grin at the Leinsters.
Exactly. Anyway, so we take on Munster on Saturday. Jerry Thornley informed me today that I think they've sold 36,000 tickets so far. So
yeah, that's a lot.
That's a good chance they'll get it above 40, which is a good crowd.
Yeah, anything above 40 is a success.
So we have quite on both sides a fairly long injury list, and obviously, as we know, sometimes we can take the Leinster press releases with the proverbial bag of salt.
Not just a pinch.
No, not just a pinch. So, like, we obviously saw Conan going off. He has a cut in his eye. James Ryan, we spoke about, his knee. Van der Fleer, I think it was his ankle he hurt. And bad news again for Will Connors. Like, that poor lad can't get a break.
Can't catch a break. He's 4 months.
4 months he's out for with that. Kelleher and Harry Byrne out for with hamstring injuries for 2 months. Apparently Harry Byrne pulled up in a warm-up for Lansdowne last weekend.
Right, yeah.
Like that again, that poor lad, maybe he just needs to take off a bit of time and just come back, in 6 months' time.
I mean, if John could get out his guitar and play a blues riff, and we could sing "If It Weren't for Bad Luck," he wouldn't have no luck at all. Albert
King, 1968.
So you get guys who, players go through phases where they just cannot stay fit no matter what they do, and it's nothing to do with them. It's just their bodies let them down, and I feel really, really gutted for those guys. I mean, especially for Will Connors. Will Connors has had every injury known to man strike him.
Yeah, but like you think that Will Connors, you thought on someone else's misfortune, he benefited. He was outstanding when he got his opportunity in the Six Nations 18 months ago or whatever it was. And since then, it's like as though he made some sort of pact with the devil, and he had his moment of fame, and everything else has just gone haywire. I'm sure he can't wait to get to the end of 2022.
I'd say so, because knowing his luck, the next thing he's going to get is Dutch elm disease or something. It's just so unfortunate. But injury updates and reports in the week before a Munster-Leinster game are, as you say, Jay, a work of fiction a lot of times. So it'll be interesting to see what teams actually do take the pitch. Actually, it'll be interesting to see what teams are on the pitch at starting whistle, because you never know who'll pull up in the warm-up even.
Yeah. My Dublin GAA theory is coming into practice.
Yeah.
So I just had a quick look, right? Just going back to say, we've played 18 games under Leo Cullen's reign of terror versus Munster, and we have won 15 of those games. And like of those games, like the 3 that we have lost, one of them included the Rainbow Cup match, where I don't really think anybody cared, like so much so to the point that Benetton won that competition. So I'm just saying, like, it probably puts it into the context of how much interest the clubs had in that particular. But like last season, if you remember, this fixture last year was the rearranged game that we had to play because of Ed Sheeran, and they swapped around the matches. We beat them 35-25 when we basically put out our seconds. And I think that was almost like it, the final nail in the coffin of this fixture. That whereas before, you mentioned that David Niall Ronan was playing for Munster when Leinster were at a low ebb. They weren't getting any respect from the press, from opposition fans, probably from their own fans. And it's just swapped so much in those 15 years that, Leinster can put out their more or less their second team, and still Munster didn't fire a shot over their bows.
Well, that game was, I'd suggest that fixture, well, we'll see after this one. But the hope for Munster fans would be that fixture was a transformative match, in as much as that's as low as we can go. Although I would argue that the Dragons game was equally so. But anyway,
or Cardiff or Zebre.
Well, I'd say the Dragons game was a nadir.
Sure, yeah, absolutely, yeah.
But Donal Lennon, I don't know if you saw Against the Head on Monday. Donal Lennon, proud Munster man to the core, questioned was it even a rivalry anymore, because Leinster had won 11 of the last 12 URC games, and he suggests that the big rivalry is Ulster and Leinster now. I don't think so. I personally, I don't agree with that, because there's more to rivalry than the scores and the doors, Miss Ford. It's a cultural thing as well. It's about relationships and about history as well. There are clubs that don't play one another, all that often, and they still have a huge rivalry because of the history of the two clubs. So I think the big rivalry, certainly spiritually at least, will always be Leinster and Munster. There may be a tighter game between Ulster and Leinster. That's a different thing altogether. But the big rivalry, the big kind of clash of concepts, the clash of cultures will always be Leinster and Munster.
But just maybe to counter that a little bit, I just had a look at again, under Leo's reign of terror, we've played Munster 19 times. We've lost 5 of those 19 games. But 2 of those games included the 2020 Pro 14 final and the Heineken Cup quarter final in 2018-19. So, there was actually something on the line in both of those games. The very big. I think we only was one final against Munster. I can't remember the year in that sequence of games, but there was
the RDS.
There was one final, in the RDS. I think it was there was a few. I think there was 3 semi-finals as well, and there was one of the COVID empty stadium games, shall we say, during COVID in the RDS against Munster. But I would suggest that when all things being equal and there was fans in the stadium, we've played Munster. We've played Ulster in the last decade on far bigger occasions.
Oh yeah.
So in other words, they're getting to those finals and semi-finals against Leinster. They're getting to quarterfinals in Europe.
Like I say, purely from a sporting sense point of view, Ulster are our biggest opponents, shall we say. There's a difference between your biggest opponents and your biggest rivals, I always argue. I'd say Ulster are certainly our toughest opponents and our biggest opponents. I still argue that Munster are our biggest rivals, not just from a sporting point of view, but from everything that goes around that, in terms of the culture of the games, the culture of the rivalry, the history of the rivalry, Black Sunday, Blue Saturday, the whole thing, all that kind of stuff that goes.
Oh, look, of course. Look at Liverpool and Everton, for example.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Everton haven't won a trophy in 30 years or something.
Yeah.
So, and they still, Liverpool fans probably want to beat Everton
more than anything else.
They're probably more than anything else, right? So I get.
But the Man United and Man City, Man United are nothing. Still Man City want to beat them.
Yeah.
But
it's the difference between opposition and rivalry, I suppose.
On Munster, it looks like their injuries on paper anyway are worse than ours, or at least as bad.
They don't have the depth, John.
They don't.
like
a lot of fresh guys back from the Emerging Ireland squad, though, which will give them a boost. But you know, this is all down to whether we're up for it or not, and if we're really up for it, we'll probably win. If we have any kind of eyes on the autumn internationals, or you know, doing any of this resting players nonsense, which I don't think we will, then we're going to surrender our dominance of this fixture over the last since the stadium opened. We've only lost once. I saw somebody say earlier today to Munster. So you know, we're going to surrender that record if we don't show up. But chances are we will. At least that's what I'm hoping.
Yeah, I'd be very disappointed. I mean, I was extraordinary. I mean, even though I know it was only the Rainbow Cup, but I was very disappointed with our performance and our attitude in that game because you know it was Munster and there was this run to maintain.
I read your angry letter in the Irish Times, Dave.
Yes, I got out to Mont Blanc. In my case, a Biro and Belvedere Bond. But no, I think there are. I mean, we saw. Okay, the teams are coming from different places, but we saw it back in 2010 when we played Munster after a run of bad results under a new coach. How transformative that fixture can be. I mean, Leinster beat Munster. We weren't particularly brilliant, but we beat them. We got if you remember, Drico got a try near the end, and that was the end of that. But it kind of gave the team confidence. Now, I think that that Leinster team had a better deck to operate off, much better players than Munster currently have available to them in terms of experience and in terms of proven quality. But this kind of result can be transformative for a team. And if you go into it with the right attitude, and it can make a difference. So I would expect both teams to go full blast with whatever's put on the pitch.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think there'll be any complacency, mental or physical.
Hopefully not. Hopefully it's a good game for the hopefully 40,000 that show up, or close to 40,000 that show up. It'd be nice to see a good match and a bit of weather that wasn't lashing rain.
Yeah. I don't think that. I think there will be rain.
Well,
looking at the various orange, yellow, magnolia, hues, weather warnings, I think that's what we're coming to.
Jumping around a little bit, I'm just looking at the way the autumn internationals fall and how the teams are named. He's deliberately named a certain amount of players as being for the A match, exactly, rather than putting them in the main squad. And then there are other people in the main squad that you'd think, wonder why he's not named in the, and vice versa. Like, Dave Kilcoyne is, has 48 caps for Ireland, but he's named in the A squad. You've got Jeremy Lockman, who's also named in the A squad, who hasn't been capped. So the way the matches fall, you've got the first weekend. Obviously, you've got South Africa, and you've got the A game against New Zealand A, which will be very interesting. They're both one day after the other.
Not New Zealand A.
Okay, New Zealand 15.
It's a New Zealand 15, not the New Zealand 15.
Okay. Well, anyway, you the next week you've got Fiji. So any of the lads that didn't do well in the South Africa match might find themselves in there, and any of the lads who did well in the A game might find themselves held back for Australia. And it's like Australia is the game that they try all the chopping and changing with Fiji, and obviously New Zealand A, and then the results are shown in the team for Australia at the end of the fixtures. It just occurred to me that's how it's going to play out, basically.
I think there's an element in terms of the names, the squads that players are assigned to. There's guys in that A squad who've been to Paris and want to get back, and there's lads in that A squad who've never been to Paris but who want to see the topless can dancers. So there's an element of carrot and stick to that squad.
Sure. Well, Marty Moore and Dave Kilcoyne, they're the most capped player. Well, depending on who else you put in there, but they're the most capped players in that potential 23. And also the other thing about the squad is there's 47 players, I think. So, that's 2 squads plus a player. So, and we were talking also about something else I noticed while I was putting those teams together is that Calvin Nash can also, I know he's a winger, but he can also play in the centre. So there's another emergency cover, or maybe he'll show up in the
and one other thing is that there's only 12 in that A squad, so they're going to kind of need to pick up a few bods from somewhere.
Oh,
because I don't think we're going to take on a team from New Zealand with only 12 guys.
No,
although let them go with the red cards, you never know what will happen.
Obviously not. But like you've also got, you could put McCluskey and Hume in the centre for that game, for example, in New Zealand. And if McCluskey plays really, really well, he might get a shot. Well, might get another shot against Fiji, and if he plays really, really, really well, he might get something against Australia. Can't see it, but it's a character for him.
Leaving everything else aside, I think one problem McCluskey might have is that as a bench option, he really only covers one position.
Oh yeah.
Whereas you said, like as you pointed out earlier about Carberry and Frawley, they cover a multitude. I mean, they cover almost the entire. Well, actually, they do. They have played in every single position on the back line between them. So it's going to be interesting. But I mean, screw Ireland. Let's get back to Leinster Munster.
Sorry for that digression.
Yeah. But to a certain extent, there's going to be a kind of a tie-in because there's guys who are going to, maybe the likes of Lockman are going to use this as the start of their progression process. Yeah. He has been good for Munster. He's had bad days, but he's had more good days than bad days for them. So he's going to use that to try and kind of progress himself. And this is a good game to do it in against what will probably be, the Irish starting front row, or at least an all-international front row, whichever way it pans out. So it'll be interesting to see. There's always loads of little subplots in these games. And they're always interesting to see. It'll be good.
Munster came out with their own injury list press release today as well, and they have a chunk of players injured. But notably, they've got Roman
Salanoa,
and Archer. Just 2 of their, say, 6 front rows are down as injured. Salanoa has a head injury, so can't see him back, right? The way things are going these days.
He is named in the squad though for the.
No, he is. But that's not for another 3 weeks, right? So, but so I think that they really are taking a very cautious approach now. Obviously, with head injuries, so if you've got a knock, I can't see them playing him. Quite honest. And then you got Archer. Archer's got an ankle injury. So again, I don't know how serious these things are, but like you'd imagine, prop is fairly reliant.
John Ryan, your time is up in Wasps.
Yeah, his time. Well, his time literally is up because unfortunately, I'm sure we'll come to that later.
Yeah.
But, there are a couple of guys floating around, the likes of John Ryan, who should never have been let go in the first place. That Munster might want to sign up.
I presume it came down to Wonga, and how much that they had in there. Although I did read, was it? I think it was Cronin was interviewed. He's playing for Leicester Tigers now.
James Cronin, yeah.
I think it was him. I just kind of very quickly went through an article that I think it was him, but they more or less said the offer was on the table. He didn't sign it. He went back to Munster and said, "Yeah, I signed that." They said, "Actually, it's withdrawn."
That was Sammy Arnold.
Well, sorry, excuse me. Yes, it was Arnold. Yeah, but like they were definitely trying to tighten their belts on budgets last season.
I'd say there was a certain amount of signing to a budget, as it were. But those 2 were guys that their release kind of puzzled me because they are actually they're very good. So, they were strange. They were strange ones to release. But everyone has to cut their cloth.
Yeah. Munster always carried about 3 or 4 extra players than the other provinces for whatever reason. Historically, it's not even a coach thing because it's under several coaches. They just seem to carry a lot of squad. And with, as we've discussed previously, with the reduction to 18 games and the no clashes with internationals, you're going to need a smaller squad, and obviously budget and IRFU and pandemics and recessions and all the stuff that's coming down the road. You're going to need to have a smaller squad. So yeah, choices had to be made, and they're the ones that were made.
Yeah, there's always a sweet spot between, you don't want too big a squad because you've got too many guys sitting around who aren't playing, and that leads to, angst. And at the same time, you're going to have a lot of guys away with international duty. Rugby is a very attritional game, so you're going to have a lot of injuries. So you need a big squad. It's always trying to find the sweet spot. That's always the tricky part.
Yeah. Well, somebody would have the opinion, for example, that why did Leinster let Peter Luley go and keep Ed Byrne, and other people might say, why did Munster keep Stephen Archer and let John Ryan go? It's I would have said there wasn't a huge amount between Byrne. Maybe Byrne was clearly ahead from selection before Dooley left.
But Byrne was getting picked for Ireland to go down on tour to New Zealand, right? So
exactly. But Stephen Archer and John Ryan, I don't know. I don't get that one myself. So Stephen Archer has pictures of one of the coaches in compromising positions. Is all I can think.
Well, he's approaching the
he's a good pro. Don't get me wrong.
I'm sure he is, but what I'm saying is he's approaching the Munster all-time.
Yeah, I mean we do.
It's not just one coach likes him like that. To get 250 odd Munster caps,
and they've had a lot of coaches in that time.
Exactly, yeah. So a lot of coaches like him. You know what I mean?
So, I mean, we like to take pot shots at him to a certain extent, and which is kind of fair. But to be honest with you, I'd say a lot of players would love to have half the career he had.
Of course.
The guy, he's an international, isn't he? He is.
I'm sure he is. I'll tell you one thing. I remember him playing against Leinster in this fixture 2 or 3 years ago, and he gave away about 3 or 4 utterly.
He can be an awful penalty. He's an awful penalty.
Just pointless. A kick going absolutely nowhere. Plenty of time for their fullback to catch it and gather it. And I remember he just stepped in front of the chaser.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And gives away an absolutely brain dead penalty that it's just immediately 3 points to Leinster. And I think he did that once or twice in the game. Just crazy decision. And then he was always collapsing scrums. If he's under pressure, scrum goes down.
He has a tendency to give away silly penalties, and quite a few of them. But he, as I say, I'd love to have the opportunity to give away silly penalties in a top level Interpro. I'd love to have the ability. I'd love to be able to survive in a top level of Interpro. Never mind. So I mean, for all the slings and arrows we throw at him, I mean, we're all really jealous, to be honest.
Yeah.
He had a couple of caps in 2013.
Yeah. There you go.
So that was Joe Schmidt there, was it?
I think it might have been the last few kidney games. I'll tell you now.
Yeah, Joe Schmidt was coach for 10-11, 11-12, 12-13. So 13-14 was his first year.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It was. Remember the All Black game that we nearly won? That was his first season, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was.
I'll tell you one thing that's unusual about this Munster Leinster game. That normally we hear all week about how this is going to come down to, how Munster's back row will be better than ours, right? And we've heard it for years, and it's never worked out that way. And this is the first time I haven't heard it. It's a bit of a strange one.
Archer got a cap under Kidney in the Six Nations, and another one under Joe Schmidt in the Autumn Internationals.
And there you go.
So there you go. An equal opportunity prop.
Normally, Munster are very, very confident in their back row. They have Gavin Coombs there. They have Peter O'Mahony there. But this time around, they don't seem to be as confident in it.
Yeah. They have a pretty good, that guy Coombs is pretty impressive, dude. If you put Tyke Byrne in and what's his name at 7, you've got a monster back row. That should a monster.
Well, it certainly put a fairly misfiring line out under pressure.
And also, they have the lads they have to choose from in the second row. they've got Klein and Thomas Ahern. Didn't they play somebody? Who did they play? I didn't see their game. Who did they play in the second row this week? Anyway,
this guy Edwin.
Oh yeah, your man, the big
Edogbo.
Edogbo, yeah.
There you go. How could I forget?
Tell you what, he was
He's injured.
He's got a calf injury, but he could be potentially brilliant.
Exactly.
Yeah, like he's so athletic. He's only 19 years of age, and
as a tight headlock, he's the perfect build.
But can you imagine putting him, Klein, Tyg Byrne, and Gavin Coombs on a field? That's a monster. Nobody's gonna mess with that.
I would suggest that you wouldn't put him in. Okay, you might do it for experience because he's 19, but ideally you'd want him with somebody like Ahern. Okay, that'd be too callow just now. You'd want him with Ahern. You'd want him with Tyg Byrne, because then you've got your classic tight head, your classic loose headlock. And we're talking about Leinster. I mean, one thing that where Leinster might be a bit unbalanced depending on injuries is if we have Maloney and Jenkins, because they're both kind of tight headlocks.
Mm-hmm.
I think Maloney always plays loose. Like Ryan would go tight headlock with Maloney as loose.
That's always puzzled me because I've always thought that the way they play, the style of play, even their physique would suggest the other way around.
I don't know. Maloney isn't huge.
That's what I mean. But he's powerful.
Yeah. I wouldn't say he's a character. It's like he's not a Damien Brown or a Brad Thorne. Anyway, look, let's not get bogged down in the
semantics. Like there's the one thing about him is that there's no clamour from anyone for him to be included in the Irish squads. Like, do you know what I mean? He's miles away from it.
Well, maybe unjustifiably so. I mean, if Stuart McCluskey is getting into the squad, you know, like what's he got that Kieran, or what's Kieran Treadwell got that he hasn't got? Maybe
he put in a great performance just down in New Zealand.
Yeah, it's not against Treadwell. I mean, some guys are just unfashionable. Leo was one of them himself, you know. And some guys are, and some guys are also unfortunate to come along at a time of strength in a position. I mean, Ireland do have quite a few good, you know, lock forwards. So somebody like Maloney, because he doesn't have that 1% extra that somebody like James Ryan has, it limits your ability to access caps, same way as it did for Leo, because Leo Cullen was the one that was playing for Leicester. He played for Leinster. He was a top guy. But Ireland had O'Callaghan, they had O'Connell, they had O'Kelly, and they had a lot of top guys. I mean, even Bob Casey was captain of London Irish, you know, and a very highly regarded player. Couldn't get near the squad, and this was before the days of, you know, we won't pick you if you're abroad kind of thing. Because I mean, Jordan Murphy was getting picked in the Irish team at that time. So I mean, so there was sometimes even if you're really good, it doesn't matter because there's somebody who's really, really good ahead of you.
Yeah, that's very true. That is true. So look, we'll come back to the Leinster match, but obviously last week we mentioned the English clubs, Worcester, and then about possibility of Wasps. Obviously, the news this week was sad for Wasps. I saw an interesting podcast, or listened to it, with Jim Hamilton on the Rugby Pod, and he was talking to the CEO of Wasps. And it was interesting as I was listening to it. The guy was talking about Wasps played last season in their pool against Munster, and he said when they were playing Munster, they got chatting to one of the Munster sort of Alec-a-doos at the pre-match dinner, and he pretty much said that, you know, we can't compete with the Irish clubs. Well, whatever about the French clubs having super duper budgets, whereas the Irish clubs don't have a budget because they have so many internationals. And like the two of them, both him and Jim Hamilton, were pretty much saying, what's the point in the Heineken Cup anymore? if the English clubs can't compete in it. And I was thinking, but you've put these restrictions on yourself. No one else has.
And not only that, you redone the whole bloody Heineken Cup in only 9 years ago, and changed it utterly.
Like they're talking about all the Irish clubs resting their players just for the purpose of, like they too could do that if they didn't have a salary. Why do they have a salary cap? It's not like their system is so successful with 2 clubs gone to the wall, potentially more later this season. Who knows? Some clubs can't even make it into when they legitimately win promotion from the championship. They're not allowed in because they don't meet particular financial or stadium criteria.
And that's
so like their system isn't all it's made. Their club that was so successful in Europe was jimmying and fiddling the books.
Yeah.
Like, you know what I mean? Like the sheer arrogance of them to be even trying to make the argument of, well, if you play by our rules, why don't you play by our rules instead? Why don't you play by the URC rules?
I love the salary cap.
Everything has to be by the English rules.
You see, I love the salary cap because it proves that even the English don't trust the English. There's no need for a salary cap in a business that's well run. If a business is well run, it doesn't need a salary cap. But other businesses who aren't well run need salary caps to protect themselves from, the cold, harsh realities of professional sport. And that's why it's there. It's there to stop other people being either good at their job or really, really dishonest at their job. That's why it exists. It doesn't exist to protect clubs. It exists to protect rich owners. And we've seen how it's failed to protect clubs, with so many clubs losing money year on year, and now 2 Premiership clubs, including one of the greatest clubs in English rugby, going to the wall, and one of the best community clubs in Worcester going to the wall.
In fairness, it's not there to protect rich owners. It's there to protect rugby from rich owners.
Rich owners, perhaps. Yeah, that might be a more accurate thing. But I mean, if you ran your game properly, you wouldn't need one.
Well, look,
but
if you ran your game properly and you had Saracens just pouring cash into their team.
But if that's sustainable, John, if Saracens were able to do that profitably, there's no problem with that, because that's, this is sport. Sport is capitalism with money, with balls, or maybe finance is sport with money. So if you're able to run your game and run it profitably and sustainably without, then what's the problem with that? The thing is, the salary cap the salary cap is there because others can't do that.
No, the thing is that you can run your game sustainably because your rich owner has an unexhaustible supply of.
But that's not been sustainable, John.
Well, exactly.
As I often said about. We said it about teams before, like certain French clubs. They're only one cocaine-induced heart attack away from bankruptcy.
Exactly.
And that's not sustainable either. And in France, they have a much stricter system. They have, a financial watchdog that, expects to see forecasts every year. And those forecasts have to be based on reality, not on fantasy. And if the teams don't follow those forecasts or outspend them, questions will be asked and points will be docked and teams will be relegated. It has happened in the past. So I think maybe that's what England needs. The game in England needs. It needs an element of central contracting, and it needs an element of, a financial watchdog that's going to really have teeth.
Yeah, well, they tried to do that at the onset of professionalism, and they couldn't get central contracts in then. So what? Well, maybe now they do have a chance.
But their system
there's an existential. Sorry, Jay. Just to finish that, there's an existential threat to to professional rugby in England now, John, that wasn't there in 1995.
For sure.
And wait till there's. Sorry, I was going to say exactly as Dave said, but wait till they start seeing, some of these lawsuits coming down the track. Do you think an owner wants to jump in with potentially, 100 million?
Sure.
Head injury lawsuits coming down the track. Do you think they want to jump in when they look at their peers, their multimillionaire, billionaire friends and peers, and they say, well, what do I do? Just pump money in, just open my checkbook and keep writing checks. Losing 170,000 a week. That's what Wasps were doing.
Isn't that how soccer works, pretty much?
No, really. I mean, the people who are really pumping that kind of money in can afford it because they're states. Other clubs have to be a bit more sensibly run.
Like a rugby club might get £1 million for having a logo on their jersey. Football clubs are getting 50 times that.
I mean, I think I sent it to you guys. The amount of money Shamrock Rovers have gotten from Europe this year, the prize money from Shamrock Rovers in the Europa Conference League dwarfs all the prize money in World Rugby.
Wow.
It's if Irish teams were to win every single trophy for the next 12 months, they still wouldn't make as much money as Rovers made from their Europa Conference run.
Wow.
It's just, I mean, the money in football is crazy. So to a certain extent, you can't really compare it. And the other thing is obviously you've got state involvement. But what were you saying, Jay?
No, just basically like I don't think just the owners. Just going back to the owners, like why would they? Yeah. Why would they get involved? Their whole system that they like. Just going back to John, who was talking about when rugby went pro in what year, 95, and central contracts. Like, they've had a run of it for the guts of 30 years. It clearly doesn't work by getting a sugar daddy coming in, buying a rugby club, pumping X million into it. As you say, whether it's a cocaine-induced heart attack or whether he just gets bored with his project, he walks away. The club isn't running in a profitable way without somebody stepping into his shoes. And the minute somebody isn't there, like look at Wasp's situation. They brought all on this debt thinking it was going to be, a super duper idea to have a huge big stadium, to have anchor tenants with a football club and a rugby club, to have a casino and a hotel, to have, John, I'm sure you've been there. I've been there. Dave, I'm not sure, but it's a fantastic facility that they bought, but it was rarely filled. But they probably didn't care that they were giving away free tickets to all the local schools and bring, the $5 for a schoolboy ticket, but bring your dad for free. Like that's unsustainable.
There are no good businessmen who are poor, and there are no rich bad businessmen, right? Well, maybe Donald Trump. But the reason why these guys who buy rugby clubs,
he's really rich.
Yeah. The guys who buy rugby clubs they buy them as investment vehicles. That's why they do it. You'll get a few who are, I grew up on the terraces watching the club all through their lives and, bought into it because it's the great love of their life. Those are slightly different. Those are the outliers. But most of the businessmen buy the clubs as a business, and they want to make money out of it in the end. And eventually they're going to see, I'm not making money out of this, and they're going to stop writing the checks. And that's what happened in a couple of times. I mean, Derek Richardson made his money with 123.ie. He's not an idiot. He didn't build that company and sell it for a fortune because he's a gobshite. Mm-hmm. He at some point he was going to look and say, I can't underwrite this anymore. I can't afford to underwrite this anymore. It's loss making. I'm out. So, that's where if you like John says, or if you put these rich businessmen they're not there out of love for rugby. They're not there out of love for the club. They're there for a return on investment. And if the return on investment isn't there, they're going to walk away. And that's what's happened.
I don't know. I'd say the opposite, Dave. They are there to lose money. It's a rich man's plaything. Like Bruce, what's his name, is not going to make his money back out of Bath.
But that's the other side I was talking about, John. The guy who's kind of like in love with it. I mean, there's a joke going around in football. What's the quickest way to become a millionaire? Be a billionaire and buy a football club.
Yeah, there's one in jazz actually. How do you make $1 million playing jazz? Start with 2 million and keep gigging. There's,
I mean, like I specifically had Bruce Craig in mind when I was thinking about that whole kind of guys who walk away because they fall in love with the project kind of thing. But then there's lots of guys who will walk away, and we've seen it. We saw it years ago, Jason. Do you remember, John? Do you remember Bristol Shoguns?
Yeah, I was going to mention them. The Mitsubishi guy.
What's his name? Was it Shotton? He walked away, and the club gone. they had superstars at that club. They had Felipe, they had Augustin Pichot, you know, and he wasn't getting his return. So bye-bye. And that was the end of that club.
But you look at your man Ahern, the guy, the boxing man, snooker guy, Ahern.
Yeah.
He bought Richmond. You know, the
right.
oldest rugby club. Got all of these superstars down playing for them. You know, ex-Inter or Scott Quinnell and all these guys he brought back in the very early days of when rugby went pro.
And now they're London Irish.
Yeah, they merged into London Irish, and they, but like they were a great club in their day with loads of history. Just with a flick of a pen, their history just wiped away, and they were rolled up into one rugby club themselves in London.
Look at even Coventry. Coventry were a great rugby club, one of the greatest rugby clubs.
Well, they're still insane that now, Dave.
Yeah.
They're still going.
I know, but what I'm saying is they were a dominant powerhouse. I mean, if you look at when professionalism started, you look at the clubs that were in the clubs like Orrell, clubs like West Hartlepool, Coventry. There were lots of clubs who were up the top and are gone, to all intents and purposes. Bedford, Blackheath, Richmond.
Well, having Richmond and Harlequins a mile apart from each other, that would have been an interesting
local derby.
Yeah, exactly.
Anyway, but that's, I mean, the thing also to remember is rugby only turned professional in 1995. That's 28 years ago, less. Yeah. The first, I mean, in terms of a span of time, in terms of history, that barely qualifies as history. It's just outside the door marked current affairs. So I mean, there's still lots of time to go.
But I think there was a big surge of interest in rugby, and let's turn our attention from England back to Ireland a little bit. It just seems that it's not quite as popular as it was 10 years ago, for whatever reason. It just appears that it's always a hard sell. 10 years ago, the stadium was full for these games. 10 years ago, there was a great buzz and interest in it. Now, it just seems like we're obviously still very interested, but just in my experience, it just doesn't seem that the same level of interest. It isn't growing. It's almost stagnant, and it's
it's plateaued.
It has, and it just needs something. I don't know. I can't put my finger on the reasons being. Are the players too boring? There seems very few characters. When they're interviewed, they were all quite sterile in their
media training,
in their post-match.
That's all that is.
But okay, but there's very few of them will come out and be fun or interesting. I don't even know whether that's a contributing factor.
I mean, I would suggest maybe it is, but I mean, if you look at, there's nothing more boring than a professional sportsman. It doesn't matter what code it is. I mean, the guys who are really professional are super boring. It's the same in soccer. But I think what we need is a World Cup win.
That'd be grand.
Just a World Cup win.
I mean, to a certain extent, you've got to situate, and there needs to be a stronger rivalry within the island. There isn't really at the moment.
But we need to nurture it. We need to nurture it. Then.
Yeah. No, I agree.
Instead of, I mentioned it last week. I don't know. I don't know whether it's right, wrong, or not. But I just feel that we've gone down the road of this Leinster Munster, and we had a discussion earlier about whether or not it's it's a great rivalry and all the rest of it. Sure, Munster could win the game on Saturday. Of course they can. In a 2-horse race, anyone can win. But it just needs to mix it up a little bit. And instead of the Ulster, just even when they play the Interpros, why are they having the games over Christmas when that Leinster's going to send down a weakened team? And if Munster happen to be very strong, we mightn't come away with a win. But they play the matches on Stevens's Day down. That's a big ask for travelling fans to go down on Stevens's Day. you're going to leave your family, particularly if you're home from abroad or if you've gone back to your parents' house, it's a big ask. Like, and similarly, maybe they play the Ulster match sometimes over New Year's. It's trying to, you want to create this rivalry with fans, but they're thinking, well, I'm not going to travel down from a New Year's Eve or a New Year's Day.
I find it hard to argue with that. You see, the thing about it is, like everything, there's no one real answer. Personally, I think we need a tighter rivalry within Ireland. I think we need the Irish rugby team to do something at the World Cup, because a World Cup, for whatever reason, I mean, we all know, I mean, whenever people want to run down rugby in Ireland, they say, they failed at the World Cup. Now, the World Cup isn't the be all and end all of things in rugby. It's because of the way, our sport has evolved. But it is becoming, because of people outside rugby, for those sports, the World Cup is the be all and end all. Yeah. So they think if you fail at the World Cup, then you're a failure of a team. Failure is probably the wrong word, but you're a failure of a team.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, you got some very prominent journalists would have that argument.
Yeah. So I mean, that's kind of the perception. There is a perception out there that that's the case, and we can't. I mean, okay, we can say, look, the Autumn International, beating the All Blacks in the Summer Test is as good as winning the World Cup, and we can say that because we know the history of the game, but not everyone is as embedded in the game as we are. Yeah. And all they see is, because in no other sport is the concept of a competitive friendly a thing. Only
Cricket.
in rugby, really. Huh?
Cricket,
yeah. Well, it's that sport.
Yeah.
No, I'm only joking. Well done to Ireland, by the way, beating Scotland this morning. So they can't. So there are kind of cultural differences between the broad morass of sports followers in Ireland and rugby. So if we could get a really good World Cup campaign together, I mean, I'm not talking about winning it, but getting to winning a knockout game or even getting to a final, that would generate an awful lot of interest. And the great thing we have that England didn't have in 2003, when all those English players who went back after the World Cup with their World Cup medals around their necks, nobody got to see them because they were on pay-to-view television. The Premiership had moved to Sky. In Ireland, it's gone the other way. More and more rugby on domestic terrestrial television than ever before. So if there was a great World Cup campaign, people would see those guys week in, week out.
2 words, Dave. Hugh Cahill.
But on the other hand, I mean, one of the advantages of
very harsh words.
One of the advantages of paying for your television is, or paying for your channels is, at least I don't have to put up with Hugh Cahill. I had the dulcet tones of Ryle Nugent and Alan Quinlan at the weekend, and it was a joy.
It was. I listened to them as well. Just before we go, as we're running out of time, Leinster.
And I will say one thing about RTE is how much I love Donald Lennon. I just want to put that out there.
Yeah. Big
just a couple of bits of news. Leinster announced a friendly against Chile, which I thought was an interesting game. They're going to get free in Donnybrook. Pity it's on at 2:00 though, isn't it? Like, it sort of cuts out a lot of people that could be still in work.
Yeah, it's a game against Chile.
Might sneak
up but still,
that day. Long lunch. Go and watch the match.
What I'd love to see is Leinster try and scrummage against Brazil. Now that I'd pay money for. Have you ever seen the Brazilian scrum?
No.
Oh yeah, I have. Yeah.
It makes Argentina in the 70s look like an uncontested rugby league scrum.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's check it out. Quickly, just running through some of the other fixtures. I'll just look at the Irish teams. So Connacht take on Scarlets. It's a kind of a must-win game. Both teams. Both teams only have won one of their 5 games so far. Might be a long season for Connacht if they lose this game. I think they really have to win this and they're there and thereabouts, but
they're at home.
I think they are, but I was looking at them. They're the only team in the league without a bonus point.
That's correct. Yeah.
So they're not getting. There's. I think Ulster have 4 bonus points.
Yeah.
But
the thing about Scarlets is.
Ulster have 5 bonus points. Excuse me. Yeah. So every game that Ulster played, they've got a bonus point in.
The problem for Scarlets coming into that game is that they're getting to play on the world. I'm judging by the weather forecast. They're going to get to play on the world's newest and first 4G swimming pool.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it is looking a bit. So
it's going to be hard for Scarlets to play the kind of rugby they like to play, and they're missing Sam Luisi as well because he's suspended.
Edinburgh have 5 points as well, Jason.
Yeah.
Apparently.
Fair play to Edinburgh and fair play for Scotland. Sharks against Ulster. That'll be a tough one for our friends from the north.
Well,
Sharks looking very strong.
It's a tour to South Africa, so it's a good time of the season to get it. To be fair,
Sharks brought back all their big stars though last week against Glasgow.
Yeah.
The one thing in Ulster's favour is it's spent the week up at altitude now, and this game's down at not altitude.
And I think they had 7 or 9 guys on the pitch who had played up in Bloemfontein for 2 or 3 weeks.
Yeah,
when they were away with the Emerging Ireland, so those lads would be staying with the Ulster team as well.
Yeah.
Well, don't forget as well that the Ulster are played last week in a thriller against the Lions, and the Lions are by far and away the worst team in South Africa. I mean, they're a very skillful team, but they're not a winning team. They're the least winningest team in South Africa.
Yeah, they're a good side though, John. We saw them when they came to the RDS last year. We saw, they caused us an awful lot of difficulties. We didn't get the bonus point against them.
They did, but they are definitely the 4th best team in South Africa in terms of the URC. So,
I know some Jesus fans would say they're the 5th best team, but go on anyway.
That's also arguable, but this time they're coming up against the Sharks with all their presumably will have all their lads getting warmed up to play us. So that's one I wouldn't. I think Ulster will be happy enough that they got the bonus point win in the Lions, and I'd say they'll be just hoping to get through the game this week.
the way this season has been going, Ulster will probably be disappointed if they don't come away if they don't come away with 2 bonus points.
Disappointed, possibly the wrong word there, but
considering the repeated tri-fests we've had.
Yeah. And finally, lads, we just go back to our game for a sec. Just get a quick prediction off the 2 of you.
I can't back against Leinster, so I am going to say 25-17.
23-12.
Interesting.
You can have a good laugh next week now when it's 50-0 to 1.
Yeah, to Munster. But yeah, we always say this form is one thing, but I mean that's actually one thing we always used to say, or indeed maybe I just persist because I like to repeat myself about how form goes out the window for derby matches. But form hasn't gone out the window in the last decade in these matches. Maybe it's time for it to start going out the window, just not against us.
Hopefully not. Well, boys, thanks a million. Thanks very much for watching. If you are following us on Facebook and Twitter, please give us a like, subscription, and thanks again for watching. Cheers.